two couples spend over 4 hours bleeding out in the wreckage of a roller coaster crash and somehow survive to tell the story. A modest kids roller coaster at an indoor establishment has taken multiple lives, and Reddit helps confirm one of my own hometown urban legends. Finally, 4 riders are ejected from their seats mid-ride, resulting in Canada's deadliest roller coaster accident. So horrific that it genuinely made me question whether it inspired the Final Destination 3 roller coaster scene. The whole point of theme parks is to bring fun and joy and excitement to kids and adults alike. So when freak accidents happen at these places designed for happiness, well, it makes the feelings of grief, shock, and overall unease tend to reach unforeseen levels. My name is Luke, and welcome to LukieSpooks, where we explore the strange, the spooky, and the spiritually suspicious. And in general, roller coaster accidents are so rare and usually just not that severe. But that's not the case today, and I chose to talk about these 3 specific tragedies because these ones left me speechless. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. These stories are genuinely disturbing. So with that being said, check your lap restraints twice because it's about to be a bumpy ride. On June 2nd, 2015, at the Alton Towers theme park in England, 16 people eagerly awaited to board the Smiler roller coaster. And waiting for the very front seats on the ride were 4 excited young adults. 2 couples actually, both on separate dates. One couple was 27-year-old Daniel Thorpe and 20-year-old Vicky Balch, and the other couple was 18-year-old Joe Pugh and 17-year-old Leah Washington. So everyone boards the roller coaster, and nothing happens. So they wait, and they wait, sitting there for almost 10 minutes, until they're finally told that there's an issue and they have to get off. So they all get off. But Daniel, Vicky, Joe, and Leah, and many others had been waiting for hours, so what was a little bit longer of a wait if it meant they would be getting a chance to enjoy this very popular ride? Now, the Smiler normally operated with 4 carriages, and while the riders were waiting, the ride operator sent an extra 5th and empty carriage out for a test run. That car stalled on the tracks and had to be manually pushed to the next lift hill so it could finish the circuit. The ride operator would then send out another empty test car to complete the circuit. Still 5 cars in operation. Remember this because it's a very important detail. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Leah thought nothing of whatever maintenance issue was happening. In her head, this type of thing happens all the time. Rides need maintenance, even very safe and popular ones. 20-year-old Vicky, however, was feeling something completely different.
I just didn't feel comfortable. I just felt like poorly, if you will. And then Dan actually said, he's like, "Are you all right? You're a bit quiet."
And unbeknownst to Vicky at the time, her intuition was spot on. But before I get to why, and while our friends are waiting to get back on the roller coaster, we need to briefly talk about the Smiler itself, because it has some fascinating lore that just makes this whole accident even more ominous. The Smiler was designed to hold the record for the most inversions in the world, which it did at 14 loops. And its marketing campaign was bizarre, to say the least. A creepy smiley face began appearing all over the UK, and when the ride finally opened, riders were given this experience that was meant to brainwash them, leaving them with a permanent smile. And at the literal center was something called the Marmalizer. And while incredibly fun to say, marmalize is British slang meaning to destroy or beat someone or something to a pulp. So keep that in mind as we continue on with what happened. And very important to note, I'm not going to get into all the issues just for time's sake, but there were multiple incidents with the Smiler all the way up until its launch, and even thereafter all the way up until the incident that we're talking about today. It was problematic. But these issues were nothing like the horrors that the riders would experience in 2015. After waiting half an hour, Joe, Leah, Vicky, and Daniel would finally load into the 4 front seats of the 4x4 person carriage of the Smiler. And this was actually Joe and Leah's first official date, so they were just excited to continue on with their date after waiting forever. The guys, Joe and Daniel, would sit on the two end seats, while Leah and Vicky would sit in the two middle seats. And finally, the ride started to move, and everything proceeded as normal. But what no one, and I mean no one, had realized was that that second empty test cart that was sent out that I mentioned earlier, well, it had never made it back to the loading area. It was sitting motionless at the bottom of a valley of one of those 14 loops, and no one ever brought it back. It never cleared one of the loops because it was too light from being empty. Also because it was incredibly windy that day. Most of the rides at Alton Towers were actually closed that day because it was so windy, with gusts of wind up to 46 miles per hour. And the Smiler is deemed unsafe to operate at wind speeds up to 34 miles per hour. It should never have been open. But back to the filled car, it's already been sent off. And about mid-ride, as the car is making it to the top of one of the lifts before its next series of loops, all of a sudden, it stops. Which is exactly what should have happened, because the Smiler operates on a block system, like most roller coasters that have more than one car on the track at the same time. Basically, only one car can be in one section at a time. So if necessary, a car will be automatically stopped at the start of a section, usually only for a moment or two until the car in front of it has left that section. This is a safeguard to prevent collisions. But this time, nothing was happening. The ride operators didn't know why. Maybe it has to do with the empty car that you, I guess, forgot about. A lot of things failed here, and we will get into it. But in these cases, the ride operator needs to inform the ride engineer so they can evaluate the situation, because they're the only ones that can assess and override the block system. So a ride engineer went out to investigate what was happening. When he saw the loaded car at the top of the hill and 3 empty cars at the loading station, he was able to account for 4 cars. So he concluded that the block system must have been a mistake, or lingering from the previous early corrected mistake with the empty cart. Because no one had ever actually communicated to him that there was technically a 5th car in the circuit. And the ride engineer never visually checked the track. And, most baffling to me, the ride operator never noticed that the empty cart never returned. Disaster was imminent. So, the ride engineer overrode the block system, and the car loaded with riders climbed over the hill, and within moments of completing a loop and coming around a bend, slammed into the back of the empty carriage at 50 miles per hour. The riders had no idea what was in front of them until it was happening. The crash had the same level of impact as a 1.5-ton car accident at 90 miles per hour. And when that crash happened, it's not like the carriage just stopped moving. The 2 carriages would continue to smash into each other, crushing the legs of the 4 front passengers until the 2 cars basically fused, and then swayed back and forth at the bottom of the loop for over a minute until they finally came to a rest, at a 45-degree side angle. All 16 riders on the Smiler were injured that day, but the 4 riders in the first row and 2 of the riders in the second row were severely injured. Starting with the second row was 30-year-old Venetia Singh and her mother, 50-year-old Shanda Chauhan. They described their experience as living in a horror movie. Venetia suffered from broken ribs and a swollen lung, while her mother required multiple surgeries for her damaged stomach and liver, as well as the removal of blood clots.
There's moans, crying, screaming, and suddenly there was an eerie silence.
Overall, things were much worse in the first row. 27-year-old Daniel Thorpe suffered a broken leg and a punctured lung, and even with that was probably the least severe of the injuries. But on the other side of the ride, 18-year-old Joe Pugh had shattered both his kneecaps, ligament damage in both legs, and one of his fingers was almost fully detached. This is what he remembers.
When we went down and then out of at first loop and I had my hands in things, obviously, and then my eyes shut, and then I just heard this bang and felt something slam into my knees, and then I just kind of opened my eyes and I looked down and I could just see like blood and knee splattered onto front of carriage and stuff, and I was just like, oh, well, something's not right there. All I could see was in front of my face. I could just see this finger cut open, and I could just see bone sticking out of it, and then this finger were hanging off. So then it were hanging off. Literally, I could have just pulled it off there and then, because it was that severe.
It's a miracle they've managed to save it, really, isn't
So
it?
everybody else's, I could just see knees, really.
Yeah.
And obviously there was an awful lot of screaming, but you unbelievably couldn't feel any pain yourself.
No.
And then you noticed people taking photographs.
Yeah. Well, it's day and age we're living into, and it's like, you're going to take pictures, but you don't want it taken. So I would just I was screaming, obviously, because I were in pain, but it was more like a mental pain rather than physical.
Yeah.
And I can just remember screaming and swearing at people to just stop taking pictures.
Yeah.
But Vicky and Leah would surely endure the worst that day. The empty car essentially had a tow bar projecting out the back, right in the middle. So when the full car crashed into the empty one, that projection crushed the middle of the front of the car even further into the legs of the women. The carriage normally had a footwell for the rider's legs about half a meter wide, but this space had been compressed down to just centimeters. It took someone 20 minutes to call emergency services, and it took 50 minutes for paramedics to finally arrive at the scene. And those riders were left stuck there for 4.5 hours before finally being rescued. During that time, Leah and Vicky were basically bleeding out. Both of Vicky's legs were absolutely crushed. She was in so much pain that she remembers just wanting to die. But Vicky would survive and go on to have 7 surgeries, but in the end, doctors were only able to save one of her legs, and her right leg was amputated. Leah's legs were also crushed, and during those 4.5 hours, she would go in and out of consciousness because she was losing so much blood. Emergency rescuers had to fly blood into the park and give Leah blood transfusions on site. She actually had to be resuscitated multiple times. But miraculously, Leah would also survive, although she would have to have her left leg amputated. And despite her shock on the day of the accident, she does remember the 2 paramedics that stayed by her side to help keep her alive, and she had a chance to meet them once she recovered.
For the first time outside hospital, she is reunited with the medics whose skills and innovation kept her alive.
This technique of treating trauma has come pretty much from the recent combat in Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that, recent wars, which have now enhanced how we deliver trauma care to patients.
It's shocking that no one died in this accident. The loss of blood, waiting that long to get off the ride, being stranded at a 45-degree angle, just the physical and mental anguish. And part of the reason the rescue took so long was because it was just a logistical nightmare. The crash occurred in this dugout area of the park, but the riders were still suspended 25 feet in the air, so rescuers had to get down below the riders and then build scaffolding to reach them, which wasn't intended to be built quickly. In fact, paramedics were explicitly told not to initiate the rescue until the scaffolding was completed, but they didn't listen because they knew time was running out. They disobeyed and climbed the scaffold anyway, and it's believed this decision was critical in saving the lives of those injured. Alton Towers would close for 5 days, and the Smiler would remain closed for another 9 months until running again. Obviously, a huge investigation ensued after this accident. The blame was placed on Alton Towers. It was determined that there was nothing wrong with the roller coaster. This was completely preventable and happened solely because of operator error. Multiple errors. There was clearly a lack of communication, and the investigation found that there were 4 ride engineers working the Smiler that day that had never read the ride operating manual. It was also determined that the empty cart could actually be seen on the CCTV system, but this was never checked. Merlin Entertainment, the owners of Alton Towers, would go on to be fined £5 million for the accident, which some people, like myself, may say that's a minuscule amount for a giant corporation given the severity of the accident. But they would go on to make many changes to make sure something like this would never happen again. Most importantly, strict training on understanding the manuals, as well as communication before any major decisions.
I and the whole team are totally devastated by what happened yesterday. And first and foremost, our thoughts are with those that were injured and their families. Our heart goes out to them.
Nick Varney, the CEO of Merlin Entertainment at the time, did go to visit with all the victims to sincerely apologize for what had happened. However, Leah and Vicky would pursue lawsuits, and they did settle upon a 7-figure agreement. But that day in 2015 would be the beginning of a very long journey of physical and mental healing for those injured on the Smiler. They would all eventually return to Alton Towers, and even the location where the smashed carriage was being stored. It was very bittersweet, it brought back a lot of emotions, but it was an important step in their healing process. There's a lot of interview footage where Joe, Leah, and Vicky tell their stories, and honestly there's not much with Daniel, but it's really amazing to see how far these people have come in the last decade. At the beginning, they were just trying to move on from the shock and learn how to accomplish day-to-day tasks. But Vicky is now happily married with a kid. And after the accident, Joe and Leah actually stuck by each other's side, having gone through such a traumatic experience together. 10 years later, they're now married, and their main focus is just to live life to the fullest and experience everything they can. What happened to them on the Smiler just made them realize how precious life is and how everything can change at any moment.
So much has obviously happened in between, and obviously now we're married. Yeah.
And as horrific as that accident was, it does end with stories of survival and perseverance. However, the same cannot be said about the next tragedy, which is actually a 2-for-1, and helped me answer one of my own childhood urban legends. While I was researching this topic, I scrolled past a YouTube thumbnail that stopped me in my tracks. It showed a green kid-sized roller coaster train. The front of it was the head of a friendly snake, and I immediately recognized it because I had ridden it many times as a kid. It was called the Python Pit, and it was a small indoor roller coaster at a kids' amusement space called Jeepers. And just like that, I had this memory unlock of a tall tale that circulated amongst the kids in my town of the guy that got decapitated at Jeepers.
Huh?
And I had completely forgotten about that story and this place in general until I saw this thumbnail. But when I clicked that video, I was surprised to see that this wasn't the same story at all, even though we will get back to it. This was about the death of a toddler named Jason Dansby, who tragically passed away after falling off the Python Pit in 2011. On April 2nd, 2011, in Norridge, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, 3-year-old Jason Dansby, his twin brother, and his 2 parents were excited for a day of fun at a local entertainment space called Go Bananas. Now, Go Bananas was just a renaming of a Chuck E. Cheese-like establishment called Jeepers, which had various locations across the eastern United States and offered arcades, bumper cars, and a train ride. But the main attraction was for sure the indoor roller coaster called the Python Pit. And besides the overall eeriness and backroom vibes, there's nothing scary about the Python Pit, which makes everything that happened there even more haunting. It's designed to be accessible for kids, with a maximum speed of about 10 to 15 miles per hour, a maximum height of 10 to 15 feet, and without any inversions or extreme drops. It goes around a 300-foot track 3 times, at least it's supposed to, and then it's done. In fact, the coaster was so innocuous that you only had to be 42 inches or 3.5 feet tall to ride the roller coaster by yourself. And if you were shorter, you could still ride it. You just needed an adult with you to hold you the entire time. Now, this height requirement did vary from place to place, and there were actually some locations that increased it because they just didn't think it was high enough. However, the ride specs from the manufacturer had a minimum height requirement of 36 inches, so these establishments were technically operating within the guidelines. Regardless, Jason was 40 inches tall, but on that day, he and his twin brother were allowed to board the Python pit by themselves. So the two boys excitedly got into the first of 5 rows, the ride operator checked their lap restraints, and the ride was set off. It was reported that Jason's mother asked the ride operator if they were sure that it was okay that her boys were riding alone, to which he replied, everything was fine, until everything was not fine. As the ride progressed, Jason's excitement quickly deteriorated as he began showing signs of distress, crying and shouting for his mother. During the second lap, Jason somehow managed to wiggle himself out of the lap restraint and started to stand up on the moving ride, facing the riders behind him. The family directly behind Jason, the Shahadis, noticed what was happening and immediately began shouting at the ride operator to get his attention and stop the ride. The ride operator attempted to stop it, but the train continued onto its third lap, with Jason still standing up. One of the Shahadi family members leaned forward to try and help Jason, but it was too late. Jason fell onto the tracks between the first and second cars. Jason's fall was witnessed by multiple people standing right next to the ride. The room erupted into chaos, and to everyone's shock, the train continued on to its fourth lap. In a civil complaint, the Shahadis reported that they, quote, saw, heard, and felt the cars of the Python pit roll over Jason Dansby's body. In fact, they stated that this happened twice before Jason's body fell 4 feet onto the floor below, because the ride would go on to its 5th and final lap before finally coming to a stop. His parents and multiple others saw the entire thing. Jason was pronounced dead at the scene, and according to the medical examiner's office, he passed away from multiple injuries, including severe head injuries. An investigation would show that there were no faults or mechanical issues with the ride. Safety measures were working accurately. The height requirements were technically being met, and Jason's death was ruled to be accidental. But the court of public opinion thought the state of Illinois itself was at fault, simply for not having requirements in place to ensure the safety of children on rides. There was a $3.1 million civil suit settlement, and Gerald Marks, the owner of Go Bananas, was charged with failing to provide safety records. One issue I have with this whole thing, amongst many, is that if everything was working the way it should have and there were no mechanical issues with the ride, then why was the ride operator not able to stop the ride after the third lap, or the second lap? I don't know. Apparently, even once Go Bananas did reopen the ride, it decided not to implement any new safety precautions, even though multiple other locations had changed height requirements and even installed an additional seatbelt as a failsafe for the lap restraints. Go Bananas in Norridge would eventually close in 2020. It started to just not be the safest place to bring your kids. There was actually a petition signed by more than 3,000 people to shut the place down. The cops had been called multiple times, and things came to a head when a viral video of a brawl spread over local news.
An angry woman takes a swipe with a mop, another runs with the chair, men wrestle to the ground.
And the more I looked into this terrible accident, the more I realized that the Python pit has quite a dark past. There were 3 complaints of injuries caused by the ride at that Illinois location alone before Jason's death. In 2006, a woman reported that her daughter had struck her eye while walking away from the ride. 2 years later, in 2008, the roller coaster suddenly stopped without warning, causing a rider to injure their head. And shortly after that, a young girl suffered a broken wrist. And as I looked more into Jason's case, I found this Reddit post. It states, I had an ex-girlfriend of mine explain an incident which occurred at a facility similar to Chuck E. Cheese. This happened in or around Chicago, Illinois. Apparently this place had a kiddie roller coaster. Apparently, some young kid got out of his restraints in the front car and fell out forward onto the tracks. The coaster proceeded to roll right over him, cutting him in half. The rest of the post gets more graphic. Pause to read the rest if you want. So that is very grim, but also probably highly exaggerated based on any available information and eyewitness accounts. But scrolling through the comments on the Defunctland subreddit, there were so many people speaking up about their own experiences at various Jeepers locations and riding the Python pit, and realizing in retrospect how strange the place was, a sentiment I fully support. This Redditor commented, "I miss Jeepers. Indoor amusement parks were a trip, and sadly probably something of the past now. People who would otherwise be into liminal spaces and the back rooms may have also enjoyed the atmosphere of these places." And then once again, while perusing these discussions, I remembered the story that I had heard growing up, long before 2011, about the guy who got decapitated at Jeepers. And then I saw this comment. A Jeepers in I think Livonia, or somewhere around Detroit, had an accident on the same ride I think. Worker got decapitated by the coaster. He was my brother's friend's dad. This confirmed I was not having a false memory. Then, I found this post on the Amusement Dark subreddit. It's a TikTok video of still, grainy images of the Python pit, with creepy music playing in the background, and a caption that says, "Rare aesthetic, working at Jeepers in Wonderland Mall, Michigan in 2003, and doing maintenance on a coaster, but your coworker turns on the ride and you get decapitated." And in that Reddit post, a commenter posted a link to the most official report, provided by MyFace, or the Michigan Fatality Assessment and Control Evaluation. This report was really the only confirmed and detailed information I could find about what really happened on March 1st, 2003 at the Wonderland Mall Jeepers in Livonia, Michigan. 2 weeks prior, an inspector informed the owner of Jeepers that there was an area of the track of the Python pit that was lacking support, and as such, they would need to install a metal support plate on the floor in that area. And that day started off like any other. In fact, the manager of Jeepers, as well as the ride manager of the Python pit, had a meeting with all the employees to go over company policies and procedures. Super ironic given what was to happen. At some point, the ride manager, a 43-year-old male who had been working at this Jeepers location for 7 months, went into the gated area of the roller coaster, and it's believed he was inspecting the area where this metal plating was supposed to be installed. However, the actions of the manager were never communicated to anyone and completely unknown to the ride operator, who was actively monitoring the ride that was now in its second lap. And to make things worse, the manager allegedly entered through a dark, tunneled area near the back portion of the ride. And the exact area he was inspecting was hidden from view of the ride operator by a decorative plant. This is what the MyFace report says happened. Patrons on the ride witnessed the death. It is thought that the victim was inside the tracks when he was struck, but he may have been standing alongside the track. As the roller coaster came to the position of the victim, the python head on the first car of the roller coaster either struck the victim or caught on a piece of his clothing. The victim was struck from behind by the first car in the right neck shoulder area. The victim was run over by the car and dragged approximately 5 feet before the car derailed. The ride operator heard the crash, stopped the ride, and ran over to see what happened. As trained, he notified the company manager, and then employees escorted shocked victims off the ride and lifted the train off the victim. The report summarized the events as such. The coaster ran over the back of the victim's neck and derailed. 911 was called and emergency response arrived. The victim was declared dead at the scene. And just like Jason Dansby, the official cause of death was death by multiple injuries. Investigators found no mechanical issues with the ride at all, and in fact, they determined that the metal plating that was recommended wasn't even necessary. And it seems like the Wonderland Mall Jeepers closed indefinitely after that incident, but I couldn't even officially verify that. Overall, just very thin exposure on this incident besides the MyFace and OSHA reports. Besides some unverified Redditors' comments, there are few articles. Nothing on the Wayback Machine, no lawsuits, no witness interviews. Just a real and traumatic tragedy from the early 2000s, faded through time because the internet preserved almost none of it. Overall, the Python Pit has had a troubled past. The fact that the accident with Jason Dansby even happened is mind-blowing to me. The fact that 2 3-year-olds were allowed to just ride a roller coaster by themselves with nothing but lap restraints is just bonkers. Like, regardless of the ride specifications, the math just isn't mathing for me. But let me know what you think. Also, I do feel like I got some validation and closure for this weird, forgotten urban legend. I had actually never been to the Livonia Jeepers. We had always gone to the Auburn Hills location at Great Lakes Mall. I actually had no idea that there were multiple locations until doing this research, so that actually clarified a lot for me. But the story I had always heard was that the guy stuck his head up between the tracks and it was game over. And at least based on this MyFace report, there is a strong possibility that that is exactly what happened. So if you grew up in Metro Detroit in the early 2000s and this story rings a bell, I've got you. And also, please comment below, especially if you were there. The last roller coaster disaster we're going to talk about takes us back to the 1980s, during the height of mall culture. I felt the need to include it because the more I looked into it, the more evident it is that the Mindbender incident is exactly how a roller coaster disaster would play out in a horror movie.
Did you ever have to really decide? Do what you wanna do, be what you really want to be, and find.
This story begins with the West Edmonton Mall in Alberta, Canada. First opened in 1981, the West Edmonton Mall would become the second largest mall by square footage in North America, just behind the Mall of America in Minnesota, both of which were owned by the 555 Group conglomerate. In 1983, the mall opened its indoor theme park called Fantasyland, whose main attraction was the Mindbender, which held the record for the world's largest indoor roller coaster, topping out at 145 feet high. This indoor roller coaster was everything that the Python Pit was not. This ride was expansive, reached a maximum speed of 60 miles per hour, pulled 5 Gs, and featured 3 loops. Sometimes they even reversed the last car so that riders were facing backward. But just like the Smiler, the Mindbender had a questionable history that started before it was even in operation. See, during the manufacturing of the Mindbender, Schwarzkopf, the renowned designer of the ride, went bankrupt. His liquidators ended up completing the sale of the under-manufactured ride to the West Edmonton Mall for a mere $6 million. And when the mall would need spare parts, they would just buy them from a different German company. So there was shady business going on from the start. And within 3 months of the ride officially opening in 1995, there were already complaints of how the 5G forces were pushing riders' heads down and jarring them side to side. And leave it to Reddit to shine light on personal experiences. Regardless of how much people loved this ride, there's lots of mentions of how intense the forces were, and it seems like blacking out was a common occurrence. But on June 14th, 1986, just 6 months after opening, 4 people would get into the last car of the Mindbender, and 3 of them would leave in body bags. 25-year-old Rod Chaco decided to entertain his visiting buddy, 24-year-old David Sager, with a night out at the West Edmonton Mall. Rod remembers David as being very adventurous, and he was adamant about riding the world's tallest indoor roller coaster. There was also a concert going on right next to the ride, which added a layer of excitement. The guys were just about to get on the Mindbender when they were told that the ride was closing for a bit to do some maintenance. The guys debated on what to do, and they settled on going to hang out at the arcade until the Mindbender opened back up. Meanwhile, ride operators had been receiving reports about a weird metal clanking sound, and so they decided to do a few test runs in order to determine the source, but they just couldn't figure it out. So instead of shutting the ride down completely to investigate further, about a half hour later, they decided to just open the ride back up. And once it did, Rod and David decided to load into the last 2 seats of the last 4-person car. And sitting in the 2 seats in front of them was a couple, 24-year-old Tony Mandrusiak and his fiancée, 21-year-old Cindy Sims. The lap restraints locked into place, and the ride took off with 23 passengers, ascending towards the almost infinite ceiling of the mall, concert music blasting in the background. And everything was proceeding normally. The roller coaster successfully rattled through 2 of the vertical loops. But as the train picked up speed around a bend and approached the 3rd and final loop, the last car started to fishtail back and forth. Rod grabbed onto his lap restraint, but it unlocked and released. Rod flew over David's head. And the next thing he remembers was waking up on the ground behind a concrete barrier. All of the restraints in that last car released, and the 3 other riders were ejected as well, falling 20 to 30 feet onto the concrete below. David, Tony, and Cindy all died on impact. The roller coaster would continue careening along the track, with the last car flailing behind it as it pivoted upward toward the final loop. But the friction of the derailed car slowed the train, which started to roll backward. The derailed car smashed into a concrete pillar on its descent, leaving the remaining passengers suspended and whiplashed.
Chris Desilets and Carrie Kobe, 2 Stettler teenagers, survived the ride.
It was pretty scary because we were sitting upside down and we didn't know what was happening, and like we seen people laying on the ground, and it was not a pretty sight.
Well, you could feel something going bang, bang, bang all the way down it, and you didn't know what was happening because it was shaking a lot. And before a bunch of us, me and my friends, before we went on there, a bunch of us felt like something was going to go wrong. Like we didn't really.
Yeah, we were
didn't
having
know.
second thoughts on whether we should go on or not, but we decided to go on, and then it happened.
On the ground below, as concert music continued to fill the mall, Rod tried to stand himself up, but his body basically folded in half. He saw his legs were pointing in the wrong direction, and he could barely breathe because his broken ribs had punctured his lungs.
So, you want to have fun? Well...
Just a moment ago, he was on a ride with his best friend, screaming with excitement, and now he's on the floor bleeding and broken in half, wondering where his best friend is. Rod estimated that he lay maimed on the ground for 15 minutes before anyone found him and was finally rushed to the hospital. It would be 3 days before he would learn that David didn't survive.
For the last loop that the car started to move in that way.
All the remaining passengers were injured in some way, but safely evacuated and treated. The impact shattered Rod's lower legs, crushed his left shoulder, and broke his feet, pelvis, lower back, and every rib on his left side. Doctors actually couldn't count all the fractures in his legs, and they thought they'd have to amputate. However, they decided to insert metal plates in an effort to give his bones a chance to heal, and miraculously, they did. After 6 months in the hospital, Rod stood in leg braces and married his girlfriend, Joanne. But what caused the last car of the Mindbender to fishtail so wildly, resulting in the death of 3 and almost 4 people?
The maintenance people have been looking at the situation as it sits, but the police investigation is going on. It appears from what we can see that a major part of the undercarriage sheared away.
An investigation would reveal that the undercarriage connecting the last car to the rest of the train started to separate when 4 screws became loose. The wheel assembly detached from both the car and track itself, causing the car to sway back and forth across the tracks. The damage also caused the lap bar restraints to unlock and then release, resulting in the ejection of the 4 riders. The train basically fell apart, likely the result of design flaws and poor maintenance. In initial investigations, Maintenance workers on the ride testified that they did regularly check for broken parts under the ride in the days leading up to the disaster. However, later investigations revealed that random bolts were found laying around the ride. There was also frustration because apparently the ride manual was only available in German.
Was?
That seems to be a big issue. The 555 group, the owners of the West Edmonton Mall, filed their own lawsuits because they felt that they were sold an undermanufactured and poorly designed roller coaster. Fantasyland closed temporarily after the accident, and the Mindbender would remain closed for over a year until it reopened in late 1987. Many changes were made to improve the safety of the ride, and it would continue operating all the way until 2020, when it was closed during the pandemic and was finally deconstructed in 2023. Side note, Fantasyland would have to change its name to Galaxyland in 1995 after a lawsuit from Disney because they didn't want to be associated with the Mindbender disaster. Rod Chaco did settle with the West Edmonton Mall for an undisclosed amount. And on the 30th anniversary of the accident, Rod was interviewed saying, "David, Tony, and Cindy are dead, and it changed my life forever. I think about it every day." But Rod doesn't hold any resentment towards the Mindbender or the West Edmonton Mall. He considers it an accident, plain and simple. But as a recovering opioid abuser, he continues to struggle with chronic pain due to his extensive injuries. Rod has found healing from nurturing his own family and leading people on snowmobiling adventures. He has even ridden another roller coaster, the Yellow Touring Ride at West Edmonton Mall, and he did it with his daughter. But he did say he will never do it again. Quote, "Everything came right back. We hit the first corner and the car turned sideways and I said out loud, 'Never again.'" Unquote. I don't blame you, buddy. Rod has asked the mall multiple times to install a memorial bench in order to honor what happened in June of 1986, and the most they've offered is putting up a plaque in an employees-only area. And to Rod, that is not a memorial and simply not enough. And I totally agree. West Edmonton Mall, that's really shit. And one final thing, there seems to be a lot of misinformation out there about this incident from the very start. News articles saying the roller coaster crashed at 60 miles per hour, or that the coaster crashed into a pillar killing 3 people, or the last car separated and derailed and then crashed into a pillar killing 3 people. But that's not what happened based on the credible information out there. The last car separated from the undercarriage, the lap restraints were released, 4 people were ejected, and then the empty car crashed into a pillar after rolling back from failing to complete a loop. So that is the story of how Rod Chaco miraculously survived falling off the Mindbender. And the more details you hear about this story, the harder it is to stomach. And even though it's not, these events could easily be the inspiration for the roller coaster disaster scene from Final Destination 3. A perfect night with 80s rock playing in the background that instantly turns into a nightmare. From the design of the red roller coaster, to the release of the restraints, to the roller coaster derailing and people falling to their deaths. Comment below, because if you know, you know. Well, that, my friends, is the end of this ride. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it to the end. I know there are a lot of roller coaster disasters that could be covered, but these were the stories that I felt needed to be told in this video. And for the survivors, I hope that they continue on with their healing journeys. Like, I get that these places need to make money and that maybe a ride shouldn't shut down completely because of operator error, but there's something distasteful about it. I don't know. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And even though these stories are absolutely horrific, I need to mention that your chances of actually getting injured in a roller coaster accident are extremely low, something like 1 in 16 million. So don't let these stories stop you from going out there and seeking thrills. But as always, I would love to know what you think about it all. Have you ever ridden one of these roller coasters? Do you have your own terrifying roller coaster experience? Did you grow up in Metro Detroit in the early 2000s and hear about the guy that got decapitated at Jeepers? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you're digging what we're doing over here at LukieSpooks, then consider joining in on the fun officially and subscribing. My boss Sheba and I would be forever grateful, but of course, no pressure. Anyways, thanks again, stay safe, stay away from sketchy roller coasters, and as always, stay spooky.
Yeah.